Dave Palumbo here with an RX Muscle news update. As a lot of you have seen, the George Peterson autopsy report results have been reported by innumerable news agencies. TMZ, I think, was the first one to really report it. The report was that he died of anabolic steroid-induced heart arrhythmia. I mean, that's been the diagnosis that's put out there. Of course, once again, trying to vilify anabolic steroids. I actually have the autopsy report here, so I'm not reporting based on what they're saying. I have the actual report from the coroner who did the autopsy, and we're going to go through the results, and we're going to see just how accurate what the coroner reported was, because everyone's kind of just reporting what TMZ reported, essentially. And, you know, I have the document here from the Office of the Medical Examiner from Orlando, Florida here. And we could take a look at this. It was performed by Chantel Nijuwaji, MD, medical examiner. His cause of death, according to this, is sudden cardiac dysrhythmia, which is an arrhythmia of your heart. And he's blaming it on hypertensive cardiovascular disease, which would mean high blood pressure, essentially, or prolonged high blood pressure. And he's saying it's a contributory factor being anabolic steroids. So he's not even saying that the anabolic steroids caused it, although, of course, that's what the news agency headlines have grabbed, because steroids, oh my God. Interestingly, if you look at the autopsy report, the only metabolites they actually found in his body, aside from testosterone, a very high testosterone level, was was equipoise, or boldenone, and they found some winstrol. There was nothing else in there. They didn't even find on the autopsy report, which would indicate that either they didn't do a good test, or the stuff maybe he was taking was not necessarily, you know, legitimate. Maybe he was taking a lot of testosterone and he thought he was taking other stuff. Let's go through the report. We might as well, right? Because that's the only way we're going to really get a true idea of what really happened here. According to, and they're reporting that this is, I think it's also interesting, they're saying this is a natural cause of death, which means they don't know. Let me explain to you. An arrhythmia is something where the heart would go out of rhythm all of a sudden, right? And it would, for some aberrant reason. Now, usually that could be dehydration, you know, metabolite irregularities, and the person could throw an arrhythmia and their heart cannot come out of the arrhythmia and they die, okay? That's a cop-out diagnosis because there's really no way to prove that. Now, if the data supported that, that would be a different story. But as you're going to see when we go through this, his electrolytes were all normal. His sodium and potassium were normal. He wasn't dehydrated, at least in any way that they were indicating here. So there was no diuretics in his system, at least that they indicated on the toxicology. So how do they know that it was an arrhythmia? He had no blockages in his coronary arteries. We're going to go through that as well. The diagnosis seems like it's a cop-out diagnosis because they really just don't know what happened. And no one bothered to go any further. And if you look at when they took his blood samples, they took it like the day after. You would think that in a 37-year-old man dying in a hotel room that there might be like a homicide investigation, like maybe this guy was poisoned or something. Let's get a blood sample pretty quickly here to see what's going on. That was not done. So they waited till, you know, he was in the morgue already and they were doing the autopsy, which seems very bizarre. So they documented him as being 5'6", 205 pounds, normally developed. I don't know how they can say he's normally developed. That's in and of itself seems absolutely ridiculous. They measured his, well, I'm going to cut to the meat and potatoes of this because I don't want to go through the whole thing. It would take too long. They measured his heart as a 500-gram enlarged heart that has normal configuration with a moderate amount of epicardial fat. That's the fat that surrounds the heart. Has nothing to do with blood vessels. The coronary arteries are patent. That means open and wide. Have no atherosclerosis or arteriosclerosis. That means no plaque formation in there. So he didn't obviously die of a heart attack due to blockage. There was no acute thrombi present. That means there's no clots present anywhere. And the atrial and ventricular chambers, the atrial chambers are the top chambers of the heart, the ventricles are the lower chambers, are 2 centimeters, are not dilated. So in other words, it means that his heart wasn't like pathologic in the sense it wasn't diseased or in any way whatsoever. The only thing they did note that his left ventricle wall was thick, okay, which is very consistent with an athletic heart, obviously. if you train hard and you lift heavy weights, okay, your heart, your left ventricle, which is the chamber of your heart that pumps blood to the entire body, is going to get big, just like the rest of your muscles in your body, going to get big so that it can pump blood adequately. Every top level athlete is going to have an enlarged heart, from marathon runners who have not really a thickened heart, they have a bigger chamber so they can pump more blood, to the strength athletes who have the thickened hearts, football players and stuff like that as well, which is not necessarily a problem unless you have blockages or other issues going on, which it seems as though he didn't. His aorta was normal, elastic, smooth. The lining was good. His major arteries and great veins have normal distribution, so that was good. His lungs are clear. His liver had no masses, no lesions, very normal. His GI tract was normal. His prostate was normal size, which would indicate he wasn't, abusing anything that would cause that to enlarge. His thyroid gland is normal. This is an autopsy of a very, very healthy man here so far, as for what I'm seeing. He was tested for COVID. He was negative, so he did not have COVID whatsoever. So that we can rule that out. And then, of course, we want to see what the screening, the toxicology of his blood was, even though they did do it the day after he died. He had no alcohol, no methanol, none of those type drugs. He was negative for every other narcotic, from amphetamines, barbiturates, benzodiazepines, which would be like Valium and Xanax, any kind of cannabinoids, which would be obviously your marijuana, no cocaine metabolites, no fentanyl, no opiates. So he obviously wasn't taking any recreational drugs whatsoever, not even anything to relax himself. If any of you knew George Peterson, that's the kind of guy he was. He didn't do recreational drugs. If you look at his electrolyte panel, his potassium is normal, his sodium is normal, his creatinine, which is, usually in bodybuilders is elevated, that's your level of kidney function, is low. It's like, it's not low, but it's in the low normal range, 0.75. In bodybuilders, when I look at their blood work, their creatinine is over 1 usually, and his is actually good. It's really good, and his blood urea nitrogen is good as well. So there's nothing here to indicate. Now, if you look at his blood glucose level, it's very low. It's below 10. So initially, I thought to myself, oh, maybe that's a problem. Maybe there was something involved with insulin or something like that. But what I found is, and by talking to a couple people in the know, is that, and if you look it up, as a person, in other words, if they had taken this right once he died, it would have been a little more accurate. But over time, the blood glucose degrades. And so it doesn't become a good indicator. Low blood sugar doesn't really, if it's a day after or even hours after the person dies, that could be low because there's no new sugar infusing into the blood, and there's still cellular processes going on that break down the glucose. So that's not really a smoking gun there at all. Now we go to the steroid panel, and we see there's no boldenone, novoasterone, excuse me. Boldenone did come up positive, and from what I understand, he wasn't even taking it for the last 6 weeks, but we do know that boldenone has long metabolites in the body, okay? So that could certainly still be there. There was no clenbuterol, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure he was taking clenbuterol for fat burning. None came up, so that could possibly mean that whatever he was taking was no good. Drostanolone, which is Masteron, is negative, and which is interesting also because I think he was taking that, so obviously that wasn't legitimate. Fluoxymesterone, which is halotestin, is negative. I'm pretty sure he was taking that as well, and that wasn't on there. Methandrostenolone, which is Dianabol, is negative. Let's see what else here we got here. Methyl testosterone, negative, nothing. No nandrolone, which is interesting because usually nandrolone has long metabolites. You would have thought he would have taken it in the last year, but sometimes it doesn't show up. Let's see what else we got here. Oxandrolone, which is Anavar, is negative. Probenecid, which he wouldn't be taking. That's like sometimes a lot of the Olympic athletes used to use that as a blocking agent, but obviously he's not being drug tested, so that's not going to be relevant. Stanozol, which is Winstrol, that did come up, or stanozolol, that came up positive, so that he was obviously taking some Winstrol. Turinabol, which is T-ball, came up negative. Trenbolone, negative, which is interesting because I'm pretty sure he was taking Trenbolone, and that came up negative. Testosterone came up. His usually they measure to see if you're doping. They measure your testosterone to epitestosterone ratio. Now, when your body naturally produces testosterone, it produces a certain amount of testosterone and then a certain amount of epitestosterone. If you're taking an exogenous source of testosterone, your epitestosterone in your body won't go up, so the ratio, you have way more testosterone, way less epitestosterone. Obviously, his was so high that you couldn't even measure the ratio. So he had a lot of testosterone in his body. And let's see what else here. Yeah, so his ratio is very high. That's the only thing I can see here. And I went through all the pages of all the reports and I scoured it. And once again, he also got screened for any kind of viruses, adenoviruses, coronaviruses, influenza, type A, type B, power influenzas, all 4 versions of that, respiratory syncytial virus, bordetella, chlamydia, mycoplasma, nothing. He had nothing. So he had no viral infections in his body whatsoever. The guy, if you look at this report, is not a guy who you expect to die. He has nothing wrong with him. He has no blockages in any of his arteries. His heart is functioning well. He has a slightly enlarged left ventricle, which is consistent with an athletic heart. There's no cause of death here. Whatever they gave as the diagnosis here, okay, was complete speculation. There's no way to prove it. Matter of fact, I know for a fact the guy didn't even have high blood pressure. So to say it's hypertensive-induced arrhythmia, which is really what they're saying, that his heart threw a weird rhythm because he was in hypertension, with a contributing factor from anabolic steroids, which there's absolutely no cause and effect. They cannot connect those two. There's no way to do it. They're just kind of throwing it in there because I think it's smokescreen, essentially, because they don't know what the cause of death is. They obviously didn't take enough of the right blood samples quickly enough, and either there's no way to prove what causes death, or the guy who did the report just was not smart enough to figure it out. But could it be an arrhythmia? It could have been an arrhythmia, absolutely. But to say that it was caused by hypertension or caused by anabolic steroids, that's ludicrous. And he didn't really say that the steroids caused it. He said it could be a contributing factor. So I'm not really happy with the way this was reported, which we knew this was going to happen because, look, the guy was taking anabolic steroids. We know that, okay? They were going to throw that in there no matter what, right? But I think what people were, or at least the press was hoping, was that there was going to be a real smoking gun that they can say, aha, we see, look, hypertension or, blockage in the coronary arteries or something. Heart was dysfunctional in some way or something was wrong with him. There wasn't. There's nothing here. Matter of fact, this autopsy report with all this blood work is probably 90% better than the blood work I see of all the other bodybuilders out there on a routine basis. That's not to say that theirs is terrible, but his stuff was perfect. He wasn't electrolyte depleted. He hadn't even taken a diuretic yet. The guy was well hydrated. He was drinking 2 gallons of water a day. There's no reason for this to have happened. Why it happened, only the big guy upstairs knows why it happened. To report that it was induced by anabolic steroid use and that his heart was under tremendous strain and that's what caused this arrhythmia is ludicrous. He was as light as he's ever been, right? Because he's in contest shape. He's relaxing in his hotel room. He wasn't running stairs or anything like that or in the process of posing. There was no reason for it other than the fact that maybe this was just his time to go. And it's very sad, and I know a lot of people, love George. Every time I interviewed him, what a great guy. I mean, I don't know of anyone who has a bad word to say about this guy. And when you lose someone like that, it's very sad, and everyone's looking for a reason and something to blame. And bodybuilding becomes a very easy cop-out, obviously. But I'm not buying it. That's not the reason. And this report and the autopsy findings really should have been inconclusive. I know they called it natural cause of death, which is really what it should have been. They should never even added on the little proviso that they did because they don't know if he had an arrhythmia or not. They have no idea what caused this death. And you know what? The toxicology was pretty complete, but there's other things that could have been in there as well that they didn't really look for. And I don't know if I was his family, if I'd want them to go deeper than this or not. The sad part is that he's not with us anymore, and we lost a great soul. So this is my analysis of the autopsy report. You can request that if you want on your own. In Florida, it's public record. You can request one if you want, but I pretty much went through everything here pretty thoroughly with a fine-tooth comb, and I didn't see anything, and I don't think the coroner saw anything, and that's why they came up with the conclusion that they did. You make your own decision. I'm Dave Palumbo with an RX Muscle News Update.